Are you lost in the chaotic whirlwind of day-to-day busyness? Do you yearn for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life? Welcome to Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose, the podcast dedicated to empowering women on their journey of self-discovery and finding their true purpose through their own story. I'm your host, Brenda Simmons. Welcome, my friends, to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I want to share a story with you. A few years ago, our neighbor came to us and said, "Hey, my son and daughter, they are doing a presentation. Would you be willing to hear them out?" And so, of course, we said yes. And so they came over, and it was one of those presentations on vacuum cleaners. They had just signed up to be sellers of this high-end vacuum cleaner. And so we sat through this presentation, and I'll never forget what they said, because for me, it was so profound. And it's so funny how something so simple can make such a huge difference. And it's like in the middle of something that you would not think is consequential for you. Well, the son said, "What is more important, flow or suction?" And I was like, well, it's a vacuum cleaner. Wouldn't suction be the most important thing, you know? And so I said suction, and he said, "Actually, no, it's flow." And he said, "Without proper flow, a vacuum cleaner cannot properly suction. There is no suction without flow." And this really struck me because I thought, oh my goodness, like this happens all over the world. Like this is like a natural law everywhere, right? And so I want you to think about this. When you have a body of water, so good examples are the Dead Sea or the Great Salt Lake, where you've got like in those lakes, what happens is you've got a flow of water into it, but there's no escape, there's no outflow. And so the only way for the water to escape is evaporation, and that's what causes the salt content to increase so much. So I mean, look at other examples where you don't have flow. So those are really good examples of lakes. I've also seen like sludgy ponds, right? Where it's kind of the same thing. Like it's you just don't have that good flow. And so what happens? You get a lot of bacteria and a lot of like algae growing, and it gets super sludgy, and it can actually deplete the oxygen so much in the pond that you lose the life in the pond, like the fish and whatnot. I've even had a flower pot that, like, I try so hard to grow flowers, and let's just say my thumb is not super green. So I had these pot of flowers, and last year was my second year having these flowers, and they just haven't done very well. And I've realized, I wonder if it's because there's no holes on the bottom. So I don't get a flow, I water it, and I'm constantly having to dip the pot to get the water out because the too much water is killing my plants. But aside from that, being drowned by the water, because the water's just sitting there, it kind of goes rancid, and it starts to smell real bad. And needless to say, my flowers just don't thrive. And so last year we solved that problem, and we actually drilled holes in the bottom. And I'll come back to that later because it actually worked. But then, okay, so that's if you've got something going in and there's no outflow. But what if you've got only outflow? What happens then? Well, let's take water again. If you've got a lake that is only draining out, well, pretty soon that lake becomes a dry lake bed. Or, I've seen this again with ponds, if you've got anything that you're not replenishing it, pretty soon it becomes non-existent. And so having that inflow as well as that outflow in nature all the time is what gives you that healthy life cycle. So let's look at some examples of that. Okay, a good one is rivers. You've got rivers that, you've got rain coming down, or the rivers get an inflow through either rain or groundwater. There's multiple ways, snow melt, right? So all of that water flows into the rivers. Well, eventually those rivers will flow out into the ocean. And along the way, they're bringing nutrients, they're bringing oxygen out to everything along its path. Let's look at trees, like capillary action in trees. So capillary action is that process of trees of the liquid molecules inside of tree coming in from the roots and going up the tree and out through the leaves, right? So that is that flow there. If you stop that flow, well, what happens, if let's say that flow stops in the middle of the trunk, well, your leaves die and eventually the tree dies. So you've got to have that capillary action that brings the nutrients and the liquid up to the extremities of the tree. Okay, let's look at our own bodies. Like our own bodies are full of examples of flow. So you've got breathing, right? Where you're breathing in the oxygen and you're breathing out the carbon dioxide. And obviously, I know there's a lot more that goes into that, but in a nutshell, you're breathing in nutrients, you're flowing out waste, right? How about your circulatory system? Like you've got this amazing system of flow from your heart to get that oxygen out to all of the rest of your body, and then it comes back to get replenished. So there's constantly a give and take, a give and receive of nutrients and either waste or energy or some other byproduct. So flow is a natural law. So I want you to think about this, not only in these systems of natural flow, what we see in nature and what we see in our own bodies, but I want you to look at it, as a state of how we can be in a state of flow. What does that really mean for us? Well, I think there are at least three different states of flow. So one is physical. We've just talked about that, and I'll go into a little bit more detail. Another one is a mental state of flow. And then the third is an emotional state of flow. Now, keep in mind, flow is an input and then an output. You've got to have both to be healthy. So let's talk about a little bit more about the physical flow. So we talked about the circulatory system and the breathing system from above. But really, the physical flow is this renewal of nutrients vital to life, as well as an exit of mass and energy. Now, this could be, oxygen, carbon dioxide, going through your body, but also look at your menstrual cycle, right? This happens all the time, every single month. This is a flow. And in fact, when that flow, and I think it's so ironic that we call it ant flow. So it kind of makes me laugh. But it's so true. Like that is a vital part of the functionality of our reproductive system. If you didn't have that flow, you would not have the continuation of life. How about looking at food, right? So you've got an input of food. Well, what happens if the output doesn't equal the input? Well, we have physical problems. We'll gain weight. We get, our bodies get irritated. Lots of different things can happen if we've got too much nutrients coming in and not enough going out, just like what happens with like the Great Salt Lake or the Dead Sea. How about if you don't put enough nutrients, enough energy into your body, and your output is greater? Well, again, that causes physical problems. And both of those problems can lead to really dire and life-threatening issues. So it's really important not only to have that flow, but to have that balance of the input and the output. Okay, let's look at the mental flow. And I think this is what people normally identify when you're in the flow. It's more of a mental flow, right? So you've got something that you've got to do, and it takes you a while to get into this state where things are just flowing, right? And I talked about this in my podcast last week, and this is why I wanted to go a little bit deeper, because there's more than just the mental flow. But really, what happens when you're in a mental flow is it's this state of being where you are so focused on what you're doing that you actually enter into a state of creation. And I believe that this becomes very much a spiritual process. I have been in the middle of projects and I'm like, okay, I've got to, super focus on this. And when I get into that state of flow, it is like a flood of ideas and the words that I need to, like, if I'm creating a um like a writing a document or something like that, just the words flow, right? And they come super, super easy. And it's like I'm tapping into the divine. I don't know if you've ever felt that before, but when you are truly in that state of flow, that state of creation, it is almost like you have this connection, this direct connection to God or the universe or however you define that. And you have this exchange of energy. And it's like this open conduit. I love it when I get into this state because number one, time just stands still. And it is absolutely amazing on how productive I can be when I'm in this state. So that's mental flow. And I think you could safely call it a spiritual flow as well. Let's talk about an emotional flow. And I don't think people really connect an emotional flow with this process of flow. But really, if you think about having that input and then that output, your emotions need to follow this process of flow every bit as much as your mind does and as your body does. When you allow flow, what happens is you are preventing emotions from being stuck, right? So again, if you don't have that output, then you are preventing, if you don't have that output, then the potential is that emotions will build and build and build and build until it becomes explosive. And explosive can mean different things for different people, but just know that it gets to a point where you are not able to control those emotions anymore. What's interesting about trapped emotions is they can attach to a specific body part. They can even be inherited generationally. I'm reading a book right now called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn, Wolynn. Super cool book. And he talks about how he had so many problems in his life and he realized that this was a problem that was experienced by not just him, but his ancestors, his parents, his grandparents, and he realized that it was not something that he could necessarily control because it had been inherited. And so if you've ever looked up the emotion code, that is a fantastic book. And I love the process of emotion code because it is a way to free up the blockage of these emotions that get stuck in specific parts of our body. The point is to provide a system of flow where your emotions don't get trapped in the first place. Now, you can use emotion code. You can also journal. You can intentionally feel, on purpose, feel what you are feeling instead of repressing it. You can do EFT tapping. There's a lot of things that you can do to provide that output of emotions. The key is you just got to do it. There's got to be that process there. And it's really important to notice when you feel like you're starting to bottle things up. And if you don't provide that source of output, then those emotions will get trapped inside of your body and they will cause some problems. Now, equally, if you give all the time emotionally and you're not filling your own cup, that can cause problems as well. So, by what I mean by filling your cup is you're doing that which provides you peace and the energy to face your life again. So, this could, I mean, whatever works for you, right? It could be reading a book, it could be sleeping, it could be going out and having fun, whatever really lights you up and allows you to increase the positive emotions inside of you so that you can then have those emotions available to deal with whatever else is going on in your life. Those are the things that you need to do to add that input, right? Okay, so what happens when your flow gets interrupted? Have you ever felt that? And I think it's the easiest to notice this during like a mental spiritual flow. Like when you are totally in the zone and say somebody comes in and says, "Hey, mom," or whatever your name is, come in and look at this, and it's like it's absolutely jarring. You're so focused and then all of a sudden you are jerked out of that state of being. And it's so disruptive, and it takes so long to get back into that flow. And if you look at the other ways, if you're looking at emotional flow or physical flow and you get out of that flow, you lose that momentum, and it can be so discouraging and so disheartening because it does take some effort to get back into that state. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do you get into a state of flow, whether it's a physical, a mental, or an emotional state of flow? Well, again, I talked about having that mental state of flow last week, and how when we have uninterrupted focus on what you're doing, that really helps. You put yourself in that space, versus where it's, both internal and external. I talked about listening to classical music but here's the thing, the process is similar for all of it, for mental, physical, and emotional flow. So here's 4 steps that you need to do to get yourself into a state of flow. And this is going to include if you get disrupted and you get out of that flow and out of that momentum. So these are the things that you can do to get back into that state of flow. Number 1, you've got to put yourself in a place where you can succeed. So this means, your surroundings. Like if you're trying to write a novel, you're not going to go to an amusement park, right? That is not a conducive place to write. If you're actually sitting down and writing. So you've got to look at your surroundings. Will the surroundings that you're in provide a space of success for you? Well, how about, nutrients? We we need to provide our bodies with literal and metaphorical nutrients, whether that is, actual good food, or, metaphorical nutrients could be, friendship, or, that connection that is super real. It could be, having a good support group. If the people around you are super supportive, that is putting yourself in a place where you can succeed. So think about that, in all of those states of flow. How are you putting yourself in a place where you can actually achieve that flow? Okay. So that's number 1. Number 2 is to eliminate the distractors. Okay, so whether it's, let's say we're talking physical flow, right? So you're going to eliminate the bad food that's in your home, right? You're going to eliminate um, the people who, let's say you've got people who are telling you that you can't do it. You've got to eliminate listening to those people. You've got to eliminate negative thoughts. If you are looking at emotional flow, those negative thoughts are going to distract you from that flow. Physically, eliminating notifications on your phone, just like we talked about last week. So eliminate those distractors. So number 1 was put yourself in a place where you can succeed. Number 2 was eliminate the distractors. Number 3 is to actually focus on what you're doing. At some point, you've got to just do it, right? You've got to put the work into it, right? So this could be, sitting down and typing out your book. It could be noticing what exercises are having the greatest effect on your body, or which foods are upsetting you, or, you've got to have that focus to understand what is going on and what you're doing. Now, sometimes, well, and let's go. I'm trying to give an example for each one. So emotionally, sometimes that focus is on feeling those emotions and not just suppressing them, and then visualizing them leave your body, right? So number 1 is put yourself in a place where you can succeed. Number 2 is to eliminate the distractors. Number 3 is to focus on what you're doing, do the actual work. And then number 4 is to evaluate. you're going to have to look at, okay, was I able to get into this state of flow? And how could I have done that better? What changed? What didn't work? What changes do I need to make? Then you're going to make those changes, and then that process starts all the way over again. So it's 4 simple steps. Again, put yourself in a place where you can succeed, eliminate the distractors, focus on what you're doing, actually get the work done, and then evaluate what worked and what didn't. So achieving flow, whether it's mental or physical, emotional, it's a big part of life. And I think that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about balance and how, you've got to have that balance of that input versus the output in whatever realm you're talking about. And when you do that, oh my goodness, it is powerful. It's so powerful. And I've been in a place in all 3 of these when I've been in a state of flow and also when I've not been in a state of flow. And when you really take notice of what's going on, you will be able to see it too. And you'll be able to identify the points that need to be changed and how you can succeed if you follow these simple 4 steps. I hope that has helped you out today. If you know somebody who needs to hear this, who needs to see it in action, please forward them this podcast because I do believe that this is so powerful. And I also believe that each of us has a purpose. Each of us has just a grandness that has so much to give and so much to offer this world. And when we are in that state of flow, we can live our purpose even greater. I hope you know that your purpose is in your story. Until next time, take care.
Celebrate your dreams, let them take flight, for you are a star, shining bright in every step you take. Let your light